back to a second day of our WES-CIHE Summer Institute. I see a couple of colleagues that are still joining us. But this morning for us in Boston, and it's probably afternoon or even evening, depending on where you're joining us, we have a wonderful panel of scholar practitioners. We really, yesterday, during our first day of activities, there were some very intriguing and important questions about the connection between research and practice. And as you may recall, if you were in that morning session, rather than answering, I was asking you all to hold the question for the panel today, because I really think the colleagues that are joining us today are very well positioned to answer many of your questions about the connection of between research and practice. So this for this session, I am joined by Bryce Loo from World Education Services, WES, the WES precisely that you have been hearing throughout our activities today. I am also joined by Fernanda Leal from the Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina in Brazil. Welcome, Fernanda. I'm also joined by Nick Gozik from Elon University, as well as Takehito Kamata from Sophia University. And thank you for joining us and for sharing your insights with all of us. And we will just jump right into our session, just so that you all know. The idea is that I have prepared about just a handful of questions that should get us through the first 20 minutes or so of our session. And after that, we will be opening it up to questions from all of you. Just like we have done in previous sessions of our Summer Institute, we invite you to type your questions in the chat. That means you don't need to wait until the end. You can type your question as you are thinking of it. And once we get to the question and answer portion of our session, I will invite you, if you wish to unmute and turn your video on and pose your question to the panel or to one of our panelists in particular. Of course, if you prefer not to, you can pass, but we prefer to hear from you directly from the questions you may have. But having the questions in the chat also helps us organize them thematically so that we can have a more cohesive conversation. So the first question for our panelists is to please tell us about your current position. In that context, what does research look like and how is it connected to practice? And I wonder if we could perhaps begin with Bryce.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Bryce Loo. I'm the Associate Director of Research at World Education Services, or WES, as we're often known. One of the co-hosts of this event, which we've done for quite a while. So it's great to be back. Let me start off and just tell you a little bit about my organization. I'm not sure if anyone has talked about WES yet in the context of this, so I'm happy to tell you a little bit about what we do, because I probably come from the perspective of working on international higher education, but from outside of an academic institution. So it's kind of a different kind of way you can think about where your career potentially could go in this field. WES is a social enterprise, which means that we have a very dedicated social mission, but we are at the same time revenue generating and financially self-sustaining. So we are an organization that we are a nonprofit organization, but we don't rely on donations, grants. We don't have a development arm, anything like that. We are completely financially self-sustaining, and to the point where we actually can turn a lot of that revenue around into work in our social mission. And the mission that we have is around helping those who are educated outside of the United States and Canada, the two countries that we work in, be able to get that education as well as experience and skills recognized in these countries or wherever people go in the world, right? And under this idea that lots of people are moving around the world, whether it's for education purposes, employment, and so forth. So we work in kind of an interesting intersection of international higher education, international education more broadly, as well as immigration. The primary way we do this and what we're historically known for is credential evaluation. And this is helping to basically translate somebody's educational credentials from another country into their equivalent in the US or Canada, so it can get recognized here and allow that person to kind of advance in whatever way they're looking to do. In the US, it's predominantly for international students, or those coming in with education from other countries but applying for US colleges and universities. In Canada, it's actually predominantly for immigration. So we work with the Canadian federal government. They have a kind of a suite, basically, of skills points-based immigration system, and a credential evaluation is part of that process. But we can also do it for professional licensure certification. So if you were a lawyer or an engineer or something in another country coming in, so you can get a license to practice here, we can also do it for employment. We have a lot of other programs, though, that are really geared at helping particularly immigrants and refugees, as well as international students, integrate into the labor markets within the US and Canada. So that's just a little bit of a background of what we do. My role in the organization as associate director, I both conduct some research as well as kind of project manage some of our research projects depending on what the need is. And we are kind of an all-purpose research team, meaning that whatever the needs are of the organization, they turn to us if it involves research typically. And that involves kind of both the business side of the house as well as our social impact side of the house. We actually historically started off, and I've been with the organization about 7.5 years. We focused our research a lot on international enrollment management, focused on US higher education, and that work was both externally published. It was meant to help colleges and universities with recruitment of international students. It was also, though, meant to help the organization really understand the trends and where things were going in terms of student mobility. Over time, it's really evolved a lot, and they've come to us with all sorts of needs. For example, in 2015, they came and asked us to do some work on refugees, and that turned into and that research led into some of our kind of signature programs for refugees, for example. And then right now we're doing a lot of focus more on the business side, which is involving a lot of business analytics and marketing research and stuff that I actually don't really have a background in, but kind of learning as I go, but it really ties in very strongly with a good understanding of student mobility, as well as immigration, people with education coming from other countries, and so forth. We are still doing quite a bit of work, though, on kind of the social impact that we have as an organization, as well as doing some external publishing. And I think I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'll turn it over to my colleagues and we can talk more as we go. But great to be here.
Thank you, Bryce. Fernanda, could we go with you next, please?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here. I always say that CIHE feels a little like home, so I really feel good to be here with all of you. So as Gerardo said, I'm Fernanda. I've been working at a Brazilian public federal university, the Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina, for the last 11 years. So it's been a while. UFSC is a public and multi-campi research university. We have a community of more than 70,000 people, so it's a very comprehensive university. And I work here as administrative staff. I have worked in several departments, but now I work for the Provost of Human Management and Development. So I've been pretty much assisting the provost herself, but also the whole department in general. But I have worked in different departments of the university. For instance, I've been the administrative coordinator of the international office before my PhD. And then I had the chance to stay out of the university for a while, going to CIHE for my PhD studies, and then coming back. So as I said, I've been working at this institution for a while. And what I can say is that research is very related to my practice. So I do research. I always try to do research on the things that I work on. So my main focus of research is university management and then internationalization in higher education and other topics always related to higher education and public universities in general. So currently I've been doing some research on moral dilemmas of university managers when returning to the presential work, because we've been working from distance for almost 2 years in this institution. So after this session, I'll do an interview with the assistant of the rector of the university. So I've been doing work on that, trying to understand how the university management is dealing with these issues. Also work on internationalization. And in addition, I'm a faculty at another federal university, the Universidade Federal de Sergipe. And I've been also coordinating some training program for the Ministry of Health. So pretty much this is what I've been doing recently, and I can talk more later after my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Nick, could we go with you next, please?
Sure, it's great to see everyone. I'm normally in North Carolina at Elon University. Right now I'm in Denver, Colorado for a conference. So if you see bison, behind me, or elk or moose or whatever we have here, you'll know why. So my role is Dean of Global Education. I'm the Senior International Officer and an assistant professor at Elon University. Elon is located, as I mentioned, in North Carolina. We're a residential campus, a private institution. A lot of investment has gone into particularly education abroad. We're ranked #1 in the United States for study abroad, both in terms of percentage and also in terms of quality or ranking. And within that context, a lot of our work is really thinking about how we move forward in terms of global. Before coming to Elon, I was at Boston College for 8.5 years. And so I miss being on the campus and I miss the CIHE, really amazing colleagues. And I think that's the perfect kind of example of where the scholarship and the practice can come together, particularly scholars who are working almost full-time in terms of research, and then the practitioners. But I always found myself, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a couple of minutes, is straddling those two worlds as really a scholar practitioner. And so when I think about the work that I do, it has shifted over time. So I started off as a doctoral student looking at questions of identity, race, and schooling in France, and did my dissertation research on the French island of Martinique as part of France, but with a colonial history. And so it was very much in the vein of social science research. And as I found myself in administration primarily, to Fernanda's point, the research I do now is related more to the work of the everyday work, the quotidian work of global education. So, we've been looking, for example, at questions around faculty development. What does it mean when a faculty member goes abroad and teaches and comes back to campus? I would argue that there's transformative learning for that faculty member and not just for the students, and that we rarely tap into and we rarely capture. So those kinds of questions are the kinds that we can be working on a campus. So it's justifiable to take that time to do that work. I also find that the scholarly perspective helps me in connecting with faculty members, that I understand the work they do, and the respect of being someone who's currently doing research and thinking about these questions is really important as we think about the production of knowledge on college campuses and our role within that. I also think that the research, whether you're active or not, having done the research or having gone through that course of study, allows you to be a good consumer of research. And so that also is really helpful as we're thinking about how we take the research that's out there and apply it to our practice. So within my world, I oversee international students and scholars, education abroad, really any of the global curriculum on our campus. And so really a comprehensive internationalization approach. So I'm happy to talk more about it, but really excited to be here.
Thank you very much, Nick. Takehito.
Oh, thank you so much. Very nice to meet you, everybody. My name is Takehito Kamata. I'm currently assistant professor by special appointment, and then also a university research administrator at Sophia University in Tokyo, Japan. Our Sophia University is one of the founding members of SACRU, Strategic Alliance of Catholic Universities, and we are the leading research university in East Asia. So currently, I'm working on developing international partnership through SACRU, and then also Mirai 2.0, which is an alliance of 20 universities between Swedish universities and Japanese universities. And then also, when it comes to research, for me, research stands for pragmatic research. I always incorporate real case or scenarios into my research. And I just finished attending the conference in Cape Town, South Africa, which was about research integrity. We always talk about research, but we do not teach so much about how to work with other people to organize a plan, conduct research, and then analyze data and publish research articles. Dissertation or master thesis has been focused on or individual research. But when it comes to the real research, it's not likely like that. So for me, research stands for collaborative research. And my background is coming from the public administration in master program. And when I was in a GA at the Minnesota State University, Mankato, I was part of the International Student Scholar Services. So I learned about the NAFSA concept, the importance of international education. And then also at the same time, I was also the intern at the Institutional Research Office to understand assessment of strategic planning. Then after that, I went to the University of Minnesota in higher education program, and my dissertation topic was international research collaborations. How could we help researchers to conduct research across the country? Because each country have different funding structure. Each institution have different guidelines to support researchers. Each funding agency, they have different guidelines to spend their funding and then also research X. So how could we help together, and how could we help researchers more effectively to conduct research? So this is my current research interest, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you to all of our panelists very, very much for providing this overview of your activities, your roles, but also for telling us more about the organizations and institutions that you are currently working at. I hope that for all of our audience members, this has given you a sense of why we have assembled this wonderful panel together. You can see the diversity of contexts within higher education institutions in different areas, in higher education, but outside of institutions or colleges and universities. So as you can see, we can see here a range of different perspectives. And I hope that at least one of the takeaway messages is that the career paths for researchers in international higher education are very diverse, that there isn't one path in particular that applies to everybody. So that's, I just wanted to do a bit of a summary of this first round going around. I'm going to switch the order of questions because I think some of you have addressed a couple of the questions, which I think is really wonderful because it gives us a much more organic conversation. But one of the pieces that I think would be pity not to get to is the question of the tools that you are currently utilizing or that you feel excited about. And these tools, of course, I'm referring to in a metaphorical sense, but this could be methodological tools. This could be also conceptual tools that you utilize most frequently or that you are most excited about? As you know, the theme of our Summer Institute is inclusive and innovative internationalization. And it would be really good if you could, if all of you could share perhaps some concepts or some strategies, maybe some approaches that you currently are excited about or that you are utilizing for the type of research that you are conducting. And if this is okay with you, we will go in a reverse order, because I think sometimes the last person feels like, oh, what I was planning to do or what I was planning to say has already been said. So Takehito, could we start with you this time?
Thank you. So from my perspective, I do believe two concepts are very important on my research. The first is interdisciplinary research. We are expected to work together, and then it's very hard to analyze or set our research objective from one academic perspective. We need to think from multiple perspectives, and then also to meet the public accountability. We have to explain why this research is important and why this research have to be approached from different perspectives across academic and also professional disciplines. And we also have to say that this will be not a single issue at your area. It could be affecting communities, nations, and also international areas. So that's why we need to work together across academic and professional disciplines, practitioners, scholars, researchers, students. We have to share ideas to set the common goals regardless of the field. And then also the second subject, what I believe is research integrity. And that is why right now I just finished a conference on World Conference on Research Integrity. Each country have a different definition of research ethics, data management, or legal issues, or responsible conduct of research. But when we come to the research, discussing about research plan, publishing, there's a no border. Also, we have to communicate with our administrative faculty members or professionals where we are belonging to, our affiliated institution. So we have to follow the specific guidelines, and based on the research proposal, accepted research proposal, we work together to have or to pursue expected research result. So interdisciplinary and research integrity are a very important topic in research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Takehito. Nick, what are some of these tools, whether methodological or conceptual, that are currently informing your work?
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with Takehito. The interdisciplinary approach makes good sense to me. I also think a mixed method approach, and that's not new to anyone who's in research. I was trained as a qualitative researcher, and I think there's a lot that can be added with that. But at the same time, working with colleagues that bring other kinds of skills, I think becomes really important. And less about a methodological perspective, but I would say the connection is based on the theme of this session around practice versus theory, or practice versus research and scholarship. What I've noticed in lit reviews and compiling what has already been produced is that there's some really good research that is out there, but that really rarely makes it into the hands of the people that are working on program development and with students. So a couple of years ago, I co-authored a chapter with a colleague in Australia, and we were looking at different program components of education abroad. And the first thing we had to do is figure out the same language. We both were native English speakers, but we were using very different language to talk about the same concepts. And the other thing is that I started to, pull out these articles that had been produced 2 decades previously, and I had never read them. And I was surprised by that, because I thought I had done quite a bit of investigation. And what the scholars were saying really went against the common practice, the gold standards, what a homestay means. There've been some really good articles written in the context of Japan, for example, of what it is like to be in a host family within Japan, and whether you're really treated as part of that family, whether you're really allowed to flex those muscles in terms of language development, or whether you're kind of put in a category as a visitor, or maybe in a childlike kind of category because you're someone that's different. So you see other kinds of studies along those lines. And so I think a big part is less about how I do the research and more about where it goes and how it gets summarized and how it gets shared with folks. And then I would say the reflexive piece of that of, making sure that when we're done with at different stages of that research, that we're sharing it with practitioners to get the feedback from folks, right? That we're making sure that it's actually grounded in people's experiences. Because I think one of the things that's really easy for all of us to do is to do research in a vacuum, in this kind of perfect idealized space with the questions that we already had coming in and maybe some of those assumptions. But if we're really going to make sure that the research is grounded and is helpful, for policy practice, whatever that might be, I think having those conversations becomes really important. Maybe the third thing I would say to Takehito's point is around ethics and cultural differences, and also how we do research in other countries. What it means to shove, a form in someone's face, a consent form, because that's the practice in the US, where that may feel really offensive. And we just had this at NAFSA yesterday. We had a session on research, lots and lots of people who are interested in doing more in the field. And that point came up as something that people, are grappling with, and how you do that with sensitivity and how you do that in communion with the community that you're hopefully hoping to help assist, understand better, whatever that may look like. So those are a couple of things that I've been thinking about.
These are excellent points. Thank you very much, Nick. Fernanda, could we go with you next, please?
Of course. So I was reflecting on that, and I think I can mention two main tools or methods that I really appreciate using in my practice and also on my research. And one of them is the critical discourse analysis. I think this method has really provided me with the opportunity to reflect on my own practice. And the first big project in which I used this method was in my doctoral dissertation, in which I analyzed discourses and practices on internationalization in Brazil and at my own institution. And it's interesting because I remember that at some point I had to do critical discourse analysis on my own discourses. I remember that we had this big event on the Science Without Borders program, which was a huge initiative of our federal government, and I had to give an interview on that event. So at some point, as I was analyzing the things that our international office had said about internationalization, I had to do analysis on my own things. And I also, now when I think on the past, I see that the view that I had on internationalization before doing my research on that topic was completely different. And then I came back to my activities and I had the chance to reflect on all that. So critical discourse analysis, something, it's a tool that I really appreciate using in the field of international education. Another thing is giving an assumption that I have that internationalization in higher education is mostly immersed in a very competitive paradigm with a type of colonial pattern that tends to be reproduced in our practice. I've been trying to do research a little differently, trying to really bring together the participants to think with me when doing my research. So one of the initiatives that I'm involved with is doing research at a Brazilian Federal University of Integration with the African continent, UNILAB. So we have this institution here. Most of our students come from African Portuguese-speaking countries. But we don't want to go to that university and then to be very separate. For instance, I'm the I'm the researcher and you are my participants and I'm using you. So we've been really trying to bring these people together so that they see meaning on the research that we're doing. And well, we have 2 ongoing initiatives. One of them is that we just published a book on the 10 years of that institution, and we call those people to write chapters on that with their own ways of saying they're not researchers. So many of them are not used to write an academic chapter because they work as administrative staff or they have several different positions at the university. They are students from different backgrounds. But we really invited them to participate on that so that they would engage more and see meaning on that. So that's one of the initiatives that I've been involved with. And we are also trying to organize another book using a method called photo voice, in which they have the chance to actually take pictures of the campus and show, trying to demonstrate the knowledge that they have in other ways that are not necessarily academic. Of course, that's very challenging, and there's there's a line between what can be considered scientific and what cannot. So we're always trying to take care of that and always trying to learn and calling people to teach us on different ways of doing that. So it's a path that I'm trying to go through, but it's not easy. So I consider myself a learner on that, so that our acting as a researcher and as a practitioner is not so, in which we don't put ourselves in a position of superiority.
That's so important, Fernanda. Thank you very much for sharing these exciting both tools, but also applications of what context. And I think based on many of the submissions that we received for these, I think these are important points that will inform our early career researchers that are participating in this summer institute. Bryce, same question for you. What are some of the tools, conceptual or methodological, that you are either most excited about or using most frequently?
So yeah, and I'm going to come kind of from the perspective of working from an organization, and our research again is highly applied, and it's really in service of the needs of the organization. We, for example, as a team, we don't publish, we generally don't submit, for example, to academic journals. So our work is, again, highly applied. And I honestly have a hard time describing it succinctly to people just because it varies so tremendously based on the needs. So generally in our context, there's, particularly in recent years, there's certain needs that are brought to us, and then we have to figure out what's the best way to address that particular need, right? So it can be through all sorts of different types of methodologies. We do a fair number of surveys. For example, do a lot of survey research. One thing we have to do with our organization is that's what everyone wants to default to. They always want to send out a survey. We say, are there other ways we could find this information other than always surveying people? And we use qualitative methodologies. We do some mixed methods, desk research, secondary analysis. Well, depending on the need, we'll sometimes have to find kind of a new type of methodology or something that's new to us anyways. In some cases, we've done some program evaluation work, which is basically program evaluation is highly applied research to a specific program or project. So it's really kind of run the gamut. As far as kind of the topic of the conference, the theme of the conference, I think one thing that we've thought about, particularly I think since the summer of 2020, where there were protests after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis here, we have thought a lot more about how we collect data, particularly on something like race. We've been asked more to collect data on race. When you're asking about race in an international context, it becomes extraordinarily complicated because, as we all know, race is it's a cultural construct. It depends on the context that you come from. So how do you ask that to somebody who comes from a completely different construct, but they're in the US or Canada and they've been here anywhere from a few days to, their entire adult life? it's just going to depend dramatically. And there's actually not a lot of research that we found on how you ask that, for example, of immigrants. But we're kind of testing out some things with that, looking also at things like some of the Likert scales we use in surveys, and kind of how they're understood culturally in different places, and experimenting with using things like emojis in place of kind of worded Likert scales, right? Where people would understand there's kind of common facial expressions that are used. And so things like that. So we're trying out some other things to really make sure that we reduce the bias, that's the cultural bias that's often inherent in that type of research. It's never going to be perfect, but it's something that we're kind of experimenting with at the moment.
Thank you all very, very much. And I think here we once again see the diversity and the range of our panelists and their experiences, everything from conceptualizing research in multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary ways, the significance, of course, of understanding how the very content, the what of what we are researching will vary across different national contexts, such as the concept of race, but also the how. How do we go about conducting this research, and how some of those practices may be more or less culturally compatible in different contexts. But something that I'm also taking away from this round is the significance, right, of that epistemic and intellectual humility that Fernanda was telling us about, right? And that not as researchers, rather understanding that as researchers, there is a power differential and that we need to try not to exacerbate it, but rather to minimize it so that then we can have a much more authentic exchange. Thank you all for these wonderful insights. And it's amazing just how fast time is flying by. So I am very happy to now turn it over to the Q&A portion. And we have already a question that's ready to go from actually one of our graduates from CIHE. So I'm very happy to turn it over to Lisa Unangst. Lisa, feel free to unmute. And if you want to, turn on your video, but it would be great to hear your question viva voce. Please go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, it's so wonderful to see everyone. Happy Thursday, and thanks so much to the organizers for putting this together. My question I listed in the chat, and it's about folks who are already in the field and are interested in pursuing jobs that allow them to continue their work as scholar practitioners. I'm wondering if you could speak to what sorts of questions those people on the job market might consider asking of prospective employers. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So this idea that, you know, when you're a candidate, you are also interviewing your employer, I think that's very, very significant. Would any of our panelists like to go first? Fernanda, it sounds like you may have gone through a recent transition, so maybe you could have some insights on this question.
Yes, I was thinking if I was the right person to write Lisa's question. Hi, Lisa, it's really good to see you on the video. Considering that I have a permanent position here. So the process of working at a public federal university is probably a little different from other contexts. It's very hard to get in. We go through a very competitive test, but then we are stable, let's say. So people can't fire me unless I do something very wrong. But of course, that's no reason to develop ourselves, you know, and go through education and all that. And that's what I've been trying to do. So I don't know if I'll be able to actually answer your question, Lisa, but I'll try to tell you guys a little about my own context, and maybe it works for someone who is here. So one thing is that at this institutional culture, it's there's a very a very strong separation in terms of careers. So you are either administrative staff or you are a professor, a faculty, and a researcher. And you don't have the figure of researchers. So you only have these two careers, and they are very split. So it's kind of weird, an administrative staff doing research, and I do that. And I really enjoy doing that. And I think it's important that people know that we administrative staff are also able to do that. So what I always try to do is always be involved in research and research events. And it's interesting because some people, they even think that I'm faculty, and I always try to tell them that I'm not. Of course, I am in another institution and I'm a researcher, but I like to emphasize that I work as administrative staff, and it's okay to do research. It really helps me in my practice, and it also helps me reflecting on the work that I do and contributing to the institution. So, you know, I think there's a position that should be institutionalized here. Also, there was a recent type of context in my institution trying to choose a notable woman that is a researcher at the university. And I have another colleague who's in a similar position than I am. And we decided to compete for that. But before that, we had to ask them to change the rules and put there that administrative staff would also be able to participate. And we didn't get it, but we are very happy to put our names there because I think it's important. So I always feel that here in the Brazilian context, it feels like we have to choose between one career or another. And I really want to show people and that you don't have to, because I really think that my research contributes to my practice, and definitely that my practice contribute to my research. I remember when I did my doctoral dissertation, and it's a work that I look today and I have proud of having done that. I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have done the same work if I wasn't involved in the practice of internationalization. Because one thing is when you read the articles and you see that most of them say that internationalization is almost an unconditional good. So many work on internationalization say that, but when you are working with that, you realize that not necessarily, that things are a little different in the reality, that international students here in Brazil that come from Europe or the United States, they're not seen the same way that the ones that come from Latin America or Africa. So you start to be more critical when you're actually living the reality of the thing. And I really don't know if I answered your question, Lisa. I think I moved a little forward, but that was my context. So I really hope this helped somehow.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, both Lisa, for your question and Fernanda for addressing it. It's great. We have a number of questions building up in the chat, and I hope, as it has been our practice, that those of you who are typing, I hope you will be willing also to ask the question. So I'm going to move on to Thomas. Thomas, I wonder if you would be willing to unmute and turn on your camera and maybe ask your question, which I think would be really helpful. And I think at least a few of our panelists might be able to answer it.
Sure, and thank you for that. And to situate my question into a particular context, I started my career in international education and education abroad, and because of life and love and all those wonderful things, have moved and not situated firmly within international education, but that's where my academic background is too. And so I don't often get the opportunity to try to flex the research piece, which is where I would like to kind of career-wise. I just am tasked with projects because I'm not super high up in the hierarchy to be able to have that autonomy to do the projects that I would like to do. So that's the context for my question is, when you're given projects or asked to do projects, what are some steps that you take to try to meld in that research piece so that you kind of have two things at the very end, the completed project and something maybe to go off of?
Right, excellent question. So how to be strategic in this when we are not necessarily the ones guiding or even given space, right, for conducting research? Would any of our panelists care to start? Nick, I wonder if, given your experience, you might be able to answer that question.
Yeah, my apologies for I was cut off by internet, so I'm glad that I was able to rejoin. I think it's a really good question. I would answer it in a couple different ways. One is to think about, whether you're going to be surveying students or others anyway. That's typically part of the process if you're building out a new program or you're trying to figure out if a policy is going to work. And if you do that, one of the things that you can do is build in the human subjects, making sure that you get the approval for the research in advance and building out that work a little bit more than maybe what was even originally anticipated. And that can end up doubling for both the work at hand as well as a potential research project. And it's often, IRB processes can be a little cumbersome, but once you get through that initial stage, it's really not so hard. So we actually did this, for example, on a diversity, equity, inclusion project when I was at Boston College. We were doing a survey of the campus, and part of that was to understand what students' needs were. And so we went through IRB, we got the approval, and we were able to then present and write on it later. So I think that's something to really kind of connect those two pieces. I think the other thing is to have a conversation with your director or the dean or whoever that is, and just say you're interested in some of this. Say that you're thinking about eventually moving up in the field or doing something different or going back to graduate school, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be a threat. In fact, most people want their staff to grow and to do more. And so there are a couple of things that can happen from that. If the answer is a no, well, then that may be a question of whether that's the right fit for you. But most often someone will either do one of two things. They'll say, I'm actually working on a project that maybe you would want to join, or why don't we find a way to carve out some space? So I've got a staff member right now who's just pursuing a doctorate. And he said, I want to start to do some research, and we were looking at what we needed for the office. So we carve out that space, and that becomes part of his professional development. And I'm thrilled for that. That means we've got someone who's thinking, who's smart, who's interested, who's going to provide something more to our office. So those are a couple of things. I hope they help.
Thank you very much, Nick. Takehito, I was wondering if you could add to this with your perspective.
I think according to my experience, curiosity-driven interest is very important, and then also open-minded to talk to all faculty members from all field, and then also professionals. So now I'm working with a faculty member in materials science. They talk about quantum physics, laser beam, which is not my field, but I'm from public administration education. I'm very also interested in their research education, how they train their student in the lab, which is different from our social science background. And this kind of thing is my starting point. And then I also frequently ask him about how do you teach your students? How do you communicate with your faculty members? And then kind of each of us should have a kind of open-minded attitude to learn actively about the background of one single faculty or one single academic discipline. And later we can apply that kind of learning technique to other fields. So this is a great part of our international education, because international education can be connected to any field, either social science, natural science, and also clinical science. So I really think that it would be great to reach out to individual, hopefully face-to-face, and then have a conversation will be probably a tipping point to the new journey. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So communicating that desire and that interest in research, that's very, very important. Certainly also very important to collaborate with others, right? We don't always need to be the center or the leading, right, individual in a research project. Bryce, if I could bring you into the conversation, it was in our preparation panel, it was very interesting that you shared how you are in a position that while you are focused on research, you don't necessarily control the research agenda. And I think that perspective could be quite illuminating given the question that Thomas was asking.
Yeah, you know, what struck me through the question is that, yeah, you sometimes find yourself in any position doing work that maybe isn't what you wanted to do. And what I've found in my own experience is to advocate for what you want. You know, particularly if you've been there for a little while, people know you, they know what you can do. They know the value you add. Advocate for what you want, and people will often they will want you to really thrive in your role. So it may still mean you keep a lot of your original duties, but you maybe take on a few other things, or there's kind of a reapportionment of what you do, as Nick talked about. I've found in my personal experience that that's a really helpful way to go as well. Another thing to think about, and this is again coming from more of an organizational context as opposed to an academic institution, but I found opportunities, if you're willing, if you have the time and capacity, and I know that's a big if, I've found opportunities just doing things kind of on the side of my particular role as well. I've had people come and ask me to work on things with them, and I'm willing to put in the time and do that on my own time. That not everyone has, of course, the ability to do that, depending on whatever else you have going on in your life, but that's something else to think about as well.
Fantastic. And I think these different perspectives are very, very valuable. We do have a bit of a follow-up question from Sonia for Fernanda. Sonia, would you be willing to please unmute?
Hi, Fernanda. Thank you for sharing your experience. And actually, Bryce just mentioned this a bit about having to advocate for doing what you want to do. And I'm just wondering, does that get tiring? Like, how do you do that? How do you, if you're in a position that's not institutionally reinforced, how do you make it work for you?
Yes, I think that's a very good question, Sonia, and I was already reflecting on that before you even asked. And I think that in general, I'm lucky to today work in a department in which the provost is also administrative staff and researcher. So she has both positions, and I think this helps her understanding. But I think that a good strategy is always trying to involve people at the university that are strategic, so that they see the importance of your research and that they are also involved on that. So for instance, now I'm doing this work with a colleague that she did her PhD on moral dilemmas in the public administration. So we decided to write a paper on what have been the moral dilemmas for the university managers when coming back to the presential work after the COVID pandemic. And our provost is involved with that. And that's important for her because she is the provost for human resources and development. So those results are very important, and she's going to use her in her strategies. So I think that a good strategy is trying to involve people that occupy strategic positions at university. They don't necessarily have to be authors of your paper, but they may participate somehow. But another thing is that, there's something that maybe I should share, is that when doing my PhD, I wasn't in my activities. So I got a leave and I had the chance to study and then coming back. And that was also important because before that I was at the international office, and my research on internationalization was developed from a very critical perspective. So I used the colonial theories, and some of the things that I said, I don't know if I could, if I was in the positions that I was before. So that was also important for me to have autonomy to develop the work in the specific approach that I wanted. So that was also important. So of course you have to measure how you can do things. And another situation that I remembered was that I was participating on a commission to develop a methodology to measure the necessary workforce at the departments of the university. And we decided, me and my colleagues in this commission, we decided to publish a paper on that experience, arguing that that would be very important to reinforce our methodology, the validity of our methodology. So that was also a strategy to link the technical work that I do at university with research. And indeed, of course, when the paper is evaluated by peers and published and presented in a conference, it gains more validity. It's seen with better eyes. So that's also a way to justify doing research at work when you don't have a researcher position.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Of course, as it happens in our Summer Institute, we have more questions than we can all address. But we invite you, of course, to continue reaching out, to continue networking. And with just about 3 minutes left, it is my pleasure, first of all, to thank each and all of our panelists for sharing your insights with us. I hope that we can tap on you in future to come back, because I think next time we may need a longer time for a panel like this. We really appreciate the generosity of your time, fitting this into your busy travel schedules and work schedules and other demands. So it's been such a pleasure to have all of your perspectives represented, and each of you really brought something different to our conversation. Thank you, Bryce, for sharing your email. This is a great opportunity, of course, to network, and we hope we will continue to do that precisely. So for all of our participants, I just want to remind you that the next activity, we get a bit of a break, but the next activity is going to be a panel discussion on publishing in international higher education. So you don't want to miss that panel. It will start in an hour and a half. So that's going to be 11 a.m. Boston time. And as we mentioned yesterday, we encourage you to find out what that means exactly, because if we try to provide, we may end up confusing you even more. So, or set a timer for 90 minutes from now. In the meantime, I hope you all will please join me in thanking our panelists with your favorite emoji or turning on your cameras, however you prefer. Thank you, Bryce, Fernanda, Takehito, and Nick. It's been such a pleasure having you with all of us, and we wish you the very best with the rest of your day or afternoon, depending on where you are located.